Walter Jenkins woke up every morning at 6 o'clock sharp. He had been doing this for the past 5 years since he retired from his job at Murphy's Auto Shop. At 78 years old, his body moved slower than it used to, but his mind was still clear, and his hands were still strong from 40 years of fixing cars. The old man walked to his kitchen window and looked out at his backyard. His vegetable garden was his pride and joy. Rows of tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers grew in neat lines. He had planted them himself in the spring, and now in late summer they were ready to pick. The sight of the healthy plants made him smile. Walter's house was painted bright yellow. It was a small house, but it was perfect for one person. He had bought it 32 years ago when his wife Martha was still alive. Back then, the neighborhood was full of young families with children playing in the streets. Now most of his old neighbors had moved away or passed on. New people lived in the big houses that had been built where the old small ones used to be. The yellow house stood out among all the gray and white houses around it. Some of the newer neighbors had made comments about it over the years. They said it looked old-fashioned, or that it brought down the property values. Walter didn't care what they thought. This was his home, and he had worked hard to pay for it. Every morning after breakfast, Walter would put on his old work boots and go outside. He would water his plants, pull weeds, and check for any problems. His knees hurt when he bent down, but the work made him feel useful. The garden reminded him of the one his father had taught him to grow when he was just a boy. Mrs. Rodriguez lived next door in a blue house. She was in her 60s and had moved there about 10 years ago. She was one of the few neighbors who actually talked to Walter. Sometimes she would come over to ask for help with her lawnmower or her car. Walter was always happy to help. He would fix whatever was broken and never ask for money. "You don't have to keep helping me for free," Mrs. Rodriguez would say. "That's what neighbors do." Walter would always answer back. On the other side of Walter's house lived the Thompsons. They were a young couple with 2 small children. The husband, Dave, worked long hours at an office job. The wife, Linda, stayed home with the kids. They were polite to Walter, but they kept to themselves most of the time. Walter remembered when he first moved to the neighborhood. People knew each other then. They would have barbecues in their backyards and help each other when someone needed it. Children would ride their bikes up and down the street until their parents called them in for dinner. The ice cream truck would come by every evening in summer, and kids would run out with coins in their hands. Those days were long gone. Now people drove into their garages and closed the doors without talking to anyone. Kids played inside on computers instead of outside. The only sound Walter usually heard was the hum of air conditioners and the occasional car driving by too fast. But Walter didn't let the changes make him bitter. He found peace in his daily routine. After working in the garden, he would have lunch and then sit on his front porch. He had an old wooden chair that he had painted green to match his shutters. From there, he could watch the street and wave to anyone who passed by. In the afternoons, Walter would work on small projects around his house. He would paint a section of fence, fix a loose board, or clean his gutters. His house was old, but he kept it in good condition. He had learned how to do most repairs himself during his years as a mechanic. Tools were like old friends to him. Sometimes Walter would get visits from his granddaughter, Sarah. She was 28 years old and worked as a nurse at the hospital downtown. Sarah was the daughter of Walter's son, Michael, who had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Sarah's mother had moved to another state after the funeral, but Sarah had stayed in town. She was the only family Walter had left nearby. Sarah would usually come by on Sundays. She would bring groceries and help Walter with anything he needed. They would sit on the porch and talk about her job, her friends, and her plans for the future. Walter loved these visits more than anything else in his life. "Grandpa, you should think about moving to a smaller place," Sarah would sometimes say. "This house is getting too big for you to take care of alone." "This is my home," Walter would always reply. "Your grandmother and I were happy here. I'm not ready to leave yet," Sarah understood. She knew the house held too many good memories for her grandfather to give up easily. Walter also had 3 great-nephews who lived about an hour away. They were the sons of his late brother's daughter. Jake, Tommy, and Rick were all in their 30s and belonged to a motorcycle club called the Iron Wolves. They didn't visit often, but when they did, they always made sure Walter was okay. They would check his roof, fix anything that was broken, and make sure he had everything he needed. The brothers looked tough with their leather jackets and motorcycles, but they were gentle with their elderly relative. They called him Uncle Walt and treated him with respect. Walter had watched them grow up from wild teenagers into responsible men who looked out for their family. In the evenings, Walter would sit in his living room and watch the news on his old television. He would eat a simple dinner and then read a book or work on crossword puzzles until bedtime. His life was quiet and peaceful, exactly the way he liked it. Walter had worked hard his whole life. He had served in the military, raised a family, and paid his taxes. He had never been in trouble with the law or caused problems for anyone. All he wanted now was to live out his remaining years in peace in the home he loved. The neighborhood might have changed around him, but Walter's daily routine stayed the same. He was content with his small life, his garden, and his yellow house. He didn't know that this peaceful existence was about to be shattered by people who saw him as nothing more than an easy target. It was a Tuesday morning in late August when Walter's peaceful life began to fall apart. He was in his garden picking tomatoes when he heard a car door slam in his driveway. This was unusual because most people in the neighborhood left for work hours earlier. Walter looked up and saw a large black SUV parked behind his old pickup truck. 3 men in dark suits got out of the vehicle. They looked out of place in the quiet neighborhood. Their suits were cheap and wrinkled, and they carried clipboards and folders. The man in front was heavy-set with thinning hair and small eyes. He walked with the confident stride of someone used to intimidating others. Walter wiped his hands on his pants and walked toward the men. He was curious but not worried. Maybe they were from the city about something, or perhaps they were selling something. He had dealt with all kinds of people over the years. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Walter asked politely. The heavy-set man stepped forward and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Mr. Jenkins?" "Walter Jenkins?" "That's me," Walter replied. "My name is Marcus Webb," the man said, holding out a business card. "I represent the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. These are my associates, Mr. Brown and Mr. Davis." Walter took the business card and looked at it. It had fancy lettering and an official-looking logo, but something about it seemed wrong. The cardstock felt cheap and the printing looked fuzzy. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake," Walter said. "This neighborhood doesn't have a homeowners association. It never has. I've lived here for over 30 years. Marcus's smile got wider, but his eyes stayed cold. "Oh, but you're wrong, Mr. Jenkins. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was established 3 months ago. All properties in this area are now under our jurisdiction. We have the paperwork right here." One of the other men, who Marcus had called Mr. Brown, opened a folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. He handed them to Walter, who looked them over with growing confusion. "This can't be right," Walter said. "I never signed anything like this. Nobody in the neighborhood did. How can you just create an HOA without the homeowners agreeing to it?" "The process is quite legal, I assure you," Marcus said. His voice was getting less friendly. "The fact is, Mr. Jenkins, your property is in serious violation of our standards. We're here to inform you of the problems that need to be fixed immediately." Marcus looked around Walter's yard with an expression of disgust. "First, that vegetable garden is completely inappropriate for a residential neighborhood. It's unsightly and brings down property values for everyone. It needs to be removed." Walter felt anger rising in his chest. "That garden has been there for 15 years. It's beautiful and it provides food. There's nothing wrong with it. Second," Marcus continued, ignoring Walter's protest, "the color of your house is not approved by the HOA. That yellow paint is too bright and doesn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. It needs to be changed to an approved color." "The aesthetic?" Walter said, his voice getting louder. "I've been painting this house yellow since before most of these other houses were even built." "And third," Marcus said, his voice now completely businesslike, "your fence exceeds the height limit by 6 inches. It needs to be lowered or removed entirely." Walter looked at his fence. It was the same fence that had been there when he bought the house. "That fence was here when I moved in. It's grandfathered in under any real regulations." Marcus opened his clipboard and pulled out a pen. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm afraid you have 48 hours to begin correcting these violations. The daily fines are $200 per violation per day until they're fixed. If you don't comply, we can place a lien on your property and eventually force a sale to recover the fees." "This is ridiculous," Walter said. "You can't just show up at my house and demand I change everything. I've never heard of your HOA, and I never agreed to join one." The third man, Davis, spoke for the first time. His voice was cold and threatening. "The law is the law, old man. You can fight it if you want, but it'll just cost you more money in legal fees." Walter went back into his house and returned with a folder of his own. Inside were the original property deeds, tax records, and other documents from when he bought the house. He spread them out on the hood of the SUV. "Look at these," he said. "This is proof that there was never any HOA when I bought this property. These are the original deed restrictions. There's nothing about homeowners associations or paint colors or gardens." Marcus glanced at the documents without really looking at them. "Those are old papers, Mr. Jenkins. Things change. The HOA formation supersedes any previous arrangements." "That's not how it works," Walter said. "You can't just create an HOA and force people to join without their consent." Marcus's fake smile disappeared completely. "Mr. Jenkins, we're trying to be reasonable here. Your property is bringing down the values of the entire neighborhood. We have complaints from multiple residents about the appearance of your house and yard." "Which residents?" Walter demanded. "I want to know who complained." "That information is confidential," Brown said. "But I can tell you there have been numerous complaints over the past several months." Walter looked around at the nearby houses. Mrs. Rodriguez was peeking out her window looking worried. The Thompsons' house was quiet, with both cars gone. Most of the other houses showed no signs of life. "I don't believe you," Walter said firmly. "My neighbors have never complained about my house. Some of them have even complimented my garden." Marcus stepped closer to Walter, close enough that the old man could smell cigarettes and coffee on his breath. "Listen carefully, Mr. Jenkins. We're not asking you to comply. We're telling you. You have 48 hours to start fixing these violations or the fines begin. And trust me, you don't want to let those fines pile up." Walter stood his ground despite feeling intimidated. "I'm not signing anything, and I'm not changing anything about my property based on some fake HOA documents." "Fake?" Marcus said, his voice dangerous now. "Are you calling our legal authority fake?" "That's exactly what I'm calling it," Walter said. "And if you don't leave my property right now, I'm going to call the police." The three men exchanged looks. Marcus smiled again, but this time it was purely threatening. "That would be a mistake, Mr. Jenkins. We're trying to handle this the easy way. There are other ways to deal with stubborn property owners." Walter felt a chill run down his spine, but he tried not to show his fear. "Get off my property now." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are the official violation notices," he said, shoving the envelope at Walter's chest. 48 hours, Mr. Jenkins. After that, the fines start and they don't stop until you comply." The three men got back into their SUV. Marcus rolled down the window as they prepared to leave. "We'll be back on Thursday to check on your progress. I hope you make the right choice." The SUV pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. Walter stood in his yard holding the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. He looked around at his beautiful garden, his well-maintained fence, and his cheerful yellow house. For the first time in years, his peaceful retirement felt threatened. Walter went inside and sat down at his kitchen table. He opened the envelope and read through the violation notices. They were filled with legal-sounding language and threats of fines and liens, but something about them felt wrong, just like the business card. He picked up his phone and called the city planning office. After being transferred several times, he finally reached someone who could help. "Willowbrook Estates HOA," the city clerk said. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't show any record of that organization being registered with the city. Are you sure you have the name right?" Walter felt a mixture of relief and anger. He had been right. These men were running some kind of scam. But that didn't make them any less dangerous. In fact, it might make them more dangerous. Thursday morning came faster than Walter wanted it to. He had spent the past 2 days making phone calls and trying to find out more about the fake HOA. Every office he called told him the same thing. There was no Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association registered anywhere in the county. He had also called the police, but they said they couldn't do anything until a crime was actually committed. Walter hadn't slept well the night before. He kept thinking about the threatening way Marcus had looked at him and the promise to return. Part of him hoped the men wouldn't come back, but he knew they would. People running scams didn't give up easily when they thought they had found an easy target. At 9 in the morning, Walter was watering his tomato plants when he heard the familiar sound of the black SUV pulling into his driveway. His stomach tightened with worry, but he tried to stay calm. He turned off the water and walked toward the 3 men who were getting out of the vehicle. Marcus looked angry even before he started talking. He stormed across the yard toward Walter, with Brown and Davis following close behind. Walter noticed that all three men seemed more aggressive than they had been on Tuesday. "Mr. Jenkins," Marcus shouted while he was still 20 feet away, "I can see that you've chosen to ignore our legal notice. Your garden is still here. Your house is still that ridiculous yellow color, and your fence hasn't been touched." Walter took a deep breath and tried to keep his voice steady. "That's because your HOA doesn't exist. I checked with the city, the county, and the state. There's no record of your organization anywhere." Marcus stopped walking and stared at Walter with pure hatred in his eyes. "Are you calling us liars, old man?" "I'm saying you're running a scam," Walter replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "And I'm not falling for it. I want you to leave my property and never come back." Brown and Davis moved to stand on either side of Marcus, forming a semicircle around Walter. The old man suddenly realized he was in more danger than he had thought. These men weren't just running a paperwork scam. They were prepared to use violence. "You've made a big mistake," Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. "We tried to handle this the legal way, but you want to be difficult. Fine. We can be difficult too." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "These are new violation notices. In addition to the original problems, you now have violations for failure to comply, interference with HOA business, and creating a public nuisance. The fines are now $500 per day for each violation." Walter looked at the papers but didn't take them. "Those are fake, just like everything else you've shown me. I'm not paying you a single penny, and I'm not changing anything about my property." "Oh, you'll pay," Davis said with a nasty smile. "One way or another, you'll pay." Walter started to back toward his house, but Brown moved to block his path. The old man realized he was trapped in his own front yard by three men who were much younger and stronger than he was. "Maybe you didn't understand what we told you on Tuesday," Marcus said, stepping closer. "We don't just collect fines. We also handle property enforcement. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, we have other methods." "I understand perfectly," Walter said, his voice shaking slightly. "You're criminals trying to steal my money and my property. But it's not going to work." Marcus's face turned red with anger. "Criminals? We're the legal authority here. You're the one breaking the law by refusing to comply with HOA regulations. There are no HOA regulations because there's no HOA." Walter shouted back, "I'm going inside to call the police, and if you're still here when they arrive, you can explain your fake paperwork to them." Walter tried to move toward his front door, but Marcus grabbed his arm roughly. "You're not calling anyone, old man." Walter tried to pull away from Marcus's grip, but the younger man was too strong. "Let go of me. You're trespassing on my property." "This isn't your property anymore," Marcus said, squeezing Walter's arm tighter. "This property now belongs to the Willowbrook Estates HOA for non-payment of fines and fees. We're here to take possession." Walter couldn't believe what he was hearing. These men were not only running a scam, they were trying to steal his house right out from under him. He struggled harder to get away from Marcus's grip. "You can't take my house," Walter said, his voice rising with panic. "This is America. You can't just steal someone's property." Marcus laughed coldly. "Watch us." "Brown, get the eviction notices from the car." As Brown walked toward the SUV, Walter made one more attempt to break free from Marcus's grip. He twisted his arm and tried to step away, but Marcus yanked him back violently. The sound of Walter's arm breaking was loud and sharp, like a tree branch snapping in a storm. The old man screamed in pain and fell to his knees on the concrete steps leading to his front door. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle and he could see bone sticking through the skin. "Look what you made me do," Marcus yelled. But Walter could barely hear him over the waves of pain washing through his body. "This is what happens when you don't cooperate." Walter tried to stand up, but the pain was too intense. He fell backward against the concrete steps, hitting his head hard enough to see stars. Blood began to pool under his broken arm, and he felt like he might throw up. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice came from somewhere far away. "Oh my God. I'm calling 911. The three men suddenly realized that their scam had gone too far. What had started as intimidation had become assault and battery on an elderly man in front of witnesses. Marcus looked around frantically and saw Mrs. Rodriguez on her porch with a cell phone in her hand. "Time to go," Marcus shouted to his partners. The three men ran toward their SUV like the criminals they were. Brown and Davis jumped into the vehicle while Marcus paused at the driver's door. He looked back at Walter, who was moaning in pain on the bloody concrete steps. "This is your fault, old man," Marcus yelled. "You should have just paid the fines." The SUV's engine roared to life. and the vehicle tore out of the driveway so fast that it left rubber marks on the street. Walter watched through tears of pain as his attackers disappeared around the corner. Mrs. Rodriguez rushed over from her house, her phone still pressed to her ear. "The ambulance is coming, Walter," she said, kneeling beside him carefully. "Try not to move. Your arm is broken really badly." Walter looked down at his arm and felt sick. The bone was sticking out through the skin and blood was everywhere. He had never felt pain like this in his entire life, not even when he had been injured in the military decades ago. "Who were those men?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "What did they want?" Walter tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. "Fake HOA, trying to steal my house." Mrs. Rodriguez looked confused, but she didn't ask any more questions. She could hear the ambulance sirens getting closer, and Walter needed medical help more than he needed to explain what had happened. When the paramedics arrived, they immediately started working on Walter's arm. They gave him something for the pain, but it didn't help much. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, he looked back at his yellow house and his vegetable garden. He wondered if he would ever feel safe there again. During the ambulance ride to the hospital, Walter managed to give the paramedic Sarah's phone number. She was the only family he had nearby, and she needed to know what had happened. He also asked them to call the police, though he wasn't sure what good it would do. At the hospital, the doctors told Walter that his arm was badly broken in multiple places. He would need surgery to put pins in the bones, and it might never work properly again. For a 78-year-old man who took pride in being able to take care of himself, this was almost as devastating as the attack itself. As Walter lay in the hospital bed waiting for surgery, he thought about Marcus and his fake HOA. These men had hurt him badly, but they had made one big mistake. They had messed with the wrong family. Walter might be old and alone, but he had family members who wouldn't let this attack go unpunished. Sarah Martinez was working the night shift at Metropolitan General Hospital when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer it because she was busy with a patient, but something made her look at the caller ID. It was a number she didn't recognize, but it was local. "This is Sarah," she answered quickly. "Miss Martinez, this is Dr. Bradley at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your grandfather, Walter Jenkins. He's been brought in with serious injuries." Sarah's heart stopped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He has a compound fracture of his left arm and some head trauma from a fall. He's stable, but he needs surgery." "Can you come to the hospital?" Sarah didn't even finish her shift. She told her supervisor there was a family emergency and drove across town to St. Mary's Hospital as fast as she could. During the drive, her mind raced with terrible possibilities. Had Grandpa fallen down the stairs? Had he been in a car accident? He was always so careful about everything. When Sarah reached the emergency room, she found Walter lying on a hospital bed with his arm wrapped in bloody bandages. His face was pale and drawn with pain, and there was a large bruise on the side of his head where he had hit the concrete steps. "Grandpa!" Sarah rushed to his bedside and took his good hand in both of hers. "What happened to you?" Walter looked up at his granddaughter with tears in his eyes. She had never seen him cry before, not even at her father's funeral. Whatever had happened to him was more than just a physical injury. "3 men came to my house," Walter said, his voice weak and shaky. "They said they were from some fake homeowners association. They wanted me to pay money and change my house. When I refused, they attacked me." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Someone attacked you? In your own yard?" Walter nodded slowly. "The big one grabbed my arm and twisted it until it broke. Then he shoved me down on the concrete steps. They said they were taking my house away from me." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest like nothing she had ever experienced before. Someone had hurt her grandfather, the gentlest man she knew, and tried to steal his home. She wanted to find these men and make them pay for what they had done. "Did you call the police?" Sarah asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez called them when she called the ambulance," Walter replied. "They took a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more information. The men were gone and nobody got their license plate number. A doctor came over to talk to Sarah about Walter's condition. The break was severe and would require surgery to insert metal pins. Because of Walter's age, there was a risk that his arm might never work properly again. The surgery was scheduled for early the next morning. After the doctor left, Sarah sat with her grandfather until he fell asleep from the pain medication. Then she went out to the hospital parking lot and made some phone calls. The first call was to her work to tell them she would be taking family leave. The second call was to her cousins. Jake Martinez was the oldest of the three brothers. At 34, he was a mechanic who owned his own shop and served as president of the local Iron Wolves motorcycle club. When his phone rang at midnight, he was working late on a customer's bike. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Jake could tell from his cousin's voice that something terrible had happened. "Someone attacked Grandpa," Sarah said, trying not to cry. "They broke his arm and hurt his head. He's in the hospital." Jake stopped what he was doing immediately. "What do you mean someone attacked him?" "Who would attack an old man?" Sarah explained what Walter had told her about the fake HOA men and their threats. As she talked, Jake's anger grew hotter and hotter. By the time she finished, he was seeing red. "I'm calling Tommy and Rick," Jake said. "We'll be at the hospital in an hour." Tommy Martinez was 32 and worked as a computer technician for a large company downtown. He was the smartest of the three brothers, and the one who handled all the technical aspects of the motorcycle club's business. When Jake called him, he was already in bed. "Get up," Jake said without any greeting. "Someone hurt Uncle Walt. We need to get to the hospital right now." Tommy was fully awake instantly. Walter had been like a grandfather to all three brothers after their own grandfather died. He had taught them how to work on cars and motorcycles, and he had always been there when they needed advice or help. "How bad?" Tommy asked while getting dressed. "Bad enough that he's having surgery in the morning," Jake replied. "Sarah's with him now. I'm picking you up in 10 minutes. Rick Martinez was the youngest brother at 30 years old. He worked construction and was known for his quick temper and fierce loyalty to his family. When his phone rang, he was out at a bar with some friends from work. "Rick, drop whatever you're doing and meet us at St. Mary's Hospital," Jake said. "Uncle Walt's been hurt." Rick left his beer on the bar and walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. He had learned long ago that when Jake used that tone of voice, everything else became unimportant. The three brothers met in the hospital parking lot just after 1 in the morning. They were still wearing their Iron Wolves leather jackets, and they looked out of place in the clean, quiet hospital environment. But they didn't care what anyone thought. Their family was in trouble. They found Sarah in the waiting area outside Walter's room. She looked exhausted and worried, but she managed a small smile when she saw them. "How is he?" Tommy asked, giving Sarah a hug. "Sleeping right now," Sarah replied. "The doctors say the surgery will take several hours. They have to put pins in the bone because it's broken in multiple places." Jake looked through the window at Walter's sleeping form. Even in his hospital gown with tubes and wires attached to him, the old man looked small and fragile. Jake had never seen him look so helpless before. "Tell us exactly what happened," Jake said, sitting down next to Sarah. Sarah repeated the story Walter had told her, adding the details about the fake HOA documents and the threats to steal his house. As she talked, the three brothers exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. "Fake HOA?" Tommy said. "That's a new scam. Usually these con artists go after people's bank accounts or credit cards. Taking someone's house is much more ambitious and much more dangerous," Rick added. "These guys aren't just thieves. They're willing to hurt people to get what they want." Jake stood up and walked to the window again. He looked at Walter's broken form and made a decision that would change everything for the men who had attacked him. "We're not leaving this to the police," Jake said quietly. "They don't have enough information to catch these guys, and even if they do, the courts will probably just give them a slap on the wrist." "What are you thinking?" Tommy asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm thinking these men picked the wrong family to mess with," Jake replied. "Uncle Walt doesn't have anyone else to protect him. That makes it our job." Rick cracked his knuckles loudly. "I like where this is going. We need to be smart about this," Jake continued. "These guys are organized and they're probably working other neighborhoods too. We need to find out who they are, where they operate from, and how many people they've hurt." Tommy nodded. "I can handle the research. Give me a few days and I'll know everything about them. Their real names, where they live, what kind of cars they drive, everything." "What about the rest of the club?" Sarah asked. "Will they help?" Jake looked at his brothers and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. "The Iron Wolves take care of their own. Uncle Walt might not wear our colors, but he's family. That makes this club business." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and worry. She knew her cousins would do whatever it took to protect Walter and get justice for what had happened to him. But she also knew that their idea of justice might be very different from what the courts would provide. "Just promise me you won't do anything that will get you arrested," Sarah said. Grandpa needs you to be free to help him, not sitting in jail. Jake put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. We'll be careful. But those men made a big mistake when they hurt Uncle Walt. They're about to find out what happens when you mess with the Iron Wolves family. The brothers stayed at the hospital until Walter went into surgery the next morning. As the doctors wheeled him into the operating room, he managed to give them a weak smile and a thumbs up with his good hand. That small gesture of courage in the face of pain made their decision final. The war against Walter's attackers was about to begin. Walter's surgery took 4 hours. The doctors had to insert 6 metal pins to hold the broken bones in his arm together. When he woke up in the recovery room, his arm was wrapped in a heavy cast from his wrist to his shoulder. The doctor told Sarah that Walter would need months of physical therapy, and even then his arm might never work the same way again. While Walter was recovering, the 3 Martinez brothers went to work. Jake called an emergency meeting of the Iron Wolves at their clubhouse, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. By Saturday evening, more than 20 bikers had gathered to hear what had happened to Uncle Walt. The Iron Wolves weren't just a social club for motorcycle enthusiasts. Many of the members had backgrounds in law enforcement, military service, or security work. They had resources and connections that most people didn't have access to. When Jake explained what had happened to Walter, the room went completely silent. "Nobody hurts family," said Bear, a massive man with gray hair and tattoos covering both arms. He had been in the club for 15 years and was one of Jake's most trusted friends. "What do you need us to do?" "Right now we need information," Jake replied. "These guys are running a scam, but they're organized and they're dangerous. We need to find out who they really are and how many other people they've hurt." Tommy had already started his research. He had set up his laptop on a table in the corner of the clubhouse and was typing rapidly. His computer skills were legendary in the club, and he could find information that would amaze most people. "I've been going through social media posts and local news websites," Tommy said, looking up from his screen. "I found 3 other reports of fake HOA scams in the past 6 months. All of them targeted elderly homeowners living alone." Rick stood up from where he had been sitting with some of the other members. "Did any of the other victims get hurt?" "One woman in Riverside had her windows broken when she refused to pay," Tommy replied. "Another man in Oakwood had his car tires slashed. But Uncle Walt is the first one who was physically attacked." Jake felt his anger growing. These criminals weren't just stealing money. They were terrorizing old people in their own homes. "What else did you find?" Tommy clicked on another file. "I found the black SUV. Mrs. Rodriguez was able to give me a partial license plate number, and I cross-referenced it with traffic camera footage from the area. The vehicle is registered to a company called Summit Property Management." "Never heard of them," Bear said. "Are they legitimate?" Tommy shook his head. Summit Property Management was incorporated 3 months ago with a fake address. The office building they claim to operate from has been empty for 2 years. It's definitely a shell company. Jake walked over to look at Tommy's computer screen. "What about the men themselves?" "Do we have any names besides the fake ones they gave Uncle Walt?" "I'm working on that," Tommy replied. "But I did find something interesting. The same black SUV was spotted at 2 of the other fake HOA incidents. We're definitely dealing with the same group of people." One of the newer members, a young man called Diesel, raised his hand. "My girlfriend works at the Department of Motor Vehicles. She might be able to help us trace the vehicle registration." Jake nodded. "Talk to her, but be careful. We don't want to get anyone in trouble for helping us." Another member, an older man named Patch, who used to be a police detective, spoke up. "I still have contacts in law enforcement. Let me make some calls and see what the official investigation has turned up." As the evening went on, more ideas and offers of help came from the club members. Everyone wanted to do something to help catch the men who had hurt Walter. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. Tommy would continue his computer research and try to identify the real names and addresses of the 3 attackers. Diesel would work with his girlfriend to get more information about the SUV registration. Patch would use his police contacts to find out if there were any other victims who hadn't reported their incidents publicly. The rest of the club would split up into teams and visit the other neighborhoods where the fake HOA scam had been reported. They would talk to the victims and see if they could gather any additional information about the criminals. "Remember," Jake told the group as they prepared to leave, "we're investigators right now, not enforcers. We need to find these guys before we can deal with them." Everyone stays cool and stays legal until we know what we're up against. The next few days were busy for the Iron Wolves. Tommy worked almost around the clock on his computer, following digital trails and searching databases. He discovered that Summit Property Management was connected to two other fake companies, Willow Creek HOA Services and Premier Neighborhood Management. These guys have been planning this for months, Tommy told Jake on Tuesday morning. They've created multiple fake companies and fake identities. This isn't some amateur scam, it's a professional operation. Meanwhile, Patch's police contacts had provided some disturbing information. There were at least 8 other elderly victims who had been targeted by fake HOA scams, but most of them had been too embarrassed or scared to report the incidents to the authorities. The cops know about these guys, but they don't have enough evidence to make arrests, Patch explained. The victims who did report it couldn't provide good descriptions, and there's no physical evidence except for some fake documents. The club members who had visited other neighborhoods brought back even more troubling news. The fake HOA men weren't just demanding money. They were also pressuring some victims to sign documents that would give them legal control over their properties. They're not just running a scam, Bear reported. They're trying to actually steal people's houses. If they can get an elderly person to sign the right paperwork, they might be able to force a sale and pocket the profits. Jake felt sick to his stomach. Walter's attack hadn't been random violence. It had been part of a calculated plan to terrorize him into signing away his home. The fact that Walter had refused to cooperate had probably saved him from losing everything he owned. By Thursday, Tommy had made a breakthrough. Using traffic camera footage and facial recognition software that he probably shouldn't have had access to, he had identified the 3 attackers. The big guy who hurt Uncle Walt is named Marcus Webb, Tommy announced at an emergency club meeting. He's got a criminal record going back 15 years, fraud, assault, theft, you name it. He spent time in prison twice. Tommy clicked to another photo. The other 2 are Daniel Brown and Kevin Davis. Brown has a record for identity theft and forgery. Davis has been arrested for elder abuse before, but the charges were dropped when the victim was too scared to testify. Jake studied the photos on Tommy's laptop screen. These were the faces of the men who had hurt his family. Now they had names to go with those faces. Where do they live? Rick asked. His hands were clenched into fists, and Jake could tell his younger brother was ready for action. That's the problem, Tommy replied. They're using fake addresses on all their identification. But I did find something else. The black SUV was spotted yesterday at a storage facility on the east side of town. I think that might be where they keep their fake documents and other supplies. Jake made a decision. We need to check out that storage facility, but we go in small groups and we're just gathering information. Nobody makes a move without talking to me first. As the club members prepared to leave, Jake pulled his brothers aside. I want you two to stay with me. This is getting bigger than we thought, and I don't want us getting separated if things go bad. Tommy closed his laptop and packed it away. What about Uncle Walt? Should we tell him what we found? Jake considered this. Walter was getting stronger every day, but he was still in pain and worried about his safety. Not yet. Let's get more information first. But I want someone watching his house 24 hours a day until we deal with these guys. Rick nodded. Already taken care of. Bear and Diesel are taking the first shifts. Nobody's getting near Uncle Walt's house without us knowing about it. As they left the clubhouse, Jake felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. They were finally making progress in tracking down Walter's attackers. Soon they would know everything about these criminals and where they lived, where they worked, and where they were most vulnerable. And then the real work would begin. The Iron Wolves had spent a week gathering information and building their case. Now it was time to start planning their response. Marcus Webb and his partners had hurt the wrong old man, and they were about to learn what that mistake would cost them. The storage facility on East Industrial Boulevard looked like dozens of others around the city. Rows of metal buildings filled with locked units where people kept everything from old furniture to business inventory. But for the Iron Wolves, it represented the first real lead in tracking down Walter's attackers. Tommy had used traffic camera footage to confirm that the black SUV visited the facility every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Jake decided that they needed to get inside and see what Marcus Webb and his crew were storing there. Bear had a friend who worked security at the facility, a retired Marine named Rodriguez who owed the club a favor from a few years back. When Bear explained what they needed, Rodriguez didn't hesitate to help. Unit 47, Rodriguez said, meeting them in the parking lot early Tuesday morning. That's where your black SUV goes. I've seen 3 guys with suits and clipboards coming and going for the past month. Jake, Tommy, and Rick followed Rodriguez through the maze of storage buildings. They stayed hidden behind a corner unit and waited. At exactly 9:15, the black SUV pulled through the front gate. That's them, Tommy whispered, pointing at the 3 men getting out of the vehicle. Even from a distance, they could recognize Marcus Webb's heavy build and aggressive walk. The men opened Unit 47 and went inside. Jake could see boxes, filing cabinets, and what looked like a small office setup with a desk and computer. This was definitely more than just a storage unit. It was a headquarters for their scam operation. How do we get inside? Rick asked quietly. Rodriguez held up a master key. Maintenance access. But you've got maybe 30 minutes before the next security patrol comes around. Jake made a quick decision. Tommy, you're with me. Rick, you stay out here and watch for trouble. If those guys come back early, text us immediately. Rodriguez unlocked Unit 47 and Jake and Tommy slipped inside. The space was packed with evidence of the fake HOA scam. Filing cabinets held folders labeled with different neighborhood names. Boxes contained blank violation notices, fake business cards, and official-looking letterhead. Tommy immediately went to the computer and started copying files while Jake searched through the paper documents. What they found was worse than they had imagined. Jake, look at this, Tommy said, pointing at the computer screen. They've got files on over 50 potential victims. They research the neighborhoods first, find elderly homeowners living alone, and then create fake HOA documents specifically for each area. Jake picked up a folder marked Willowbrook Estates. Inside were detailed notes about Walter and several of his neighbors, including photos of their houses and information about their finances. They've been planning this for months, Jake said, his anger growing. Look at this. They know exactly how much Uncle Walt's house is worth, what he paid for it, and how much equity he has built up. Tommy found another disturbing file on the computer. They're not just stealing money, Jake, they're actually trying to force property sales. If they can get someone to sign these fake documents, they can put a lien on the house and eventually force a foreclosure sale. And they get to buy the property for cheap, Jake realized. This isn't just fraud, it's organized theft on a massive scale. Tommy's phone buzzed with a text from Rick. Black car just pulled up. 2 women in business clothes. Jake and Tommy quickly finished copying files and photographs. They had enough evidence to put Marcus Webb and his crew away for years, but they knew the police would need time to build a case. Time that might allow the criminals to hurt more elderly victims. As they prepared to leave, Jake noticed something else in one of the filing cabinets. It was a folder labeled Enforcement Actions that contained photos of damaged property, broken windows, slashed tires, and vandalized gardens. They keep trophies, Jake said with disgust. Pictures of what they do to people who don't cooperate. Among the photos was one that made Jake's blood run cold. It showed Walter's yellow house with red X's marked on the windows and doors. Written at the bottom in Marcus's handwriting were the words, Phase 2, Physical Persuasion. Tommy looked at the photo over Jake's shoulder. They were planning to do more than just break his arm. This looks like they were going to trash his whole house. Jake folded the photo and put it in his pocket. This was personal now in a way that went beyond family loyalty. These men had planned to destroy everything Walter cared about, and they had to be stopped before they could finish what they started. They locked up the storage unit and met Rick back at the parking lot. Rodriguez had already left, giving them plausible deniability if anyone asked how they had gotten inside. What did you find? Rick asked as they walked back to their motorcycles. Enough to put these guys away forever, Jake replied. But first we need to make some calls. This is bigger than just Uncle Walt now. Back at the clubhouse, Jake spread the copied documents across a table while Tommy uploaded the computer files. The scope of the fake HOA operation was staggering. They had targeted neighborhoods in 5 different counties and had attempted to scam dozens of elderly homeowners. We need to contact all the other victims, Jake said. Some of them might be willing to testify if they know they're not alone. Bear studied the list of targeted neighborhoods. My cousin lives in Riverside. That's one of the areas they hit. Let me call him and see what he knows. Patch looked through the fake legal documents with a professional eye. These are actually pretty sophisticated, he admitted. If I didn't know they were fake, I might be fooled myself. No wonder some of the victims got scared and paid up. Jake's phone rang. It was Sarah calling from the hospital where Walter was doing his physical therapy. "How's he doing?" Jake asked. "Better," Sarah replied. "The doctors say his arm is healing well, but he's still worried about going home. He keeps asking if those men might come back." Jake looked around the room at his fellow club members, all of them focused on tracking down Walter's attackers. "Tell him he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. We're going to make sure those men never bother him again." After hanging up, Jake called another meeting of the full club. This time, members from other Iron Wolves chapters showed up as well. Word had spread through the motorcycle community about what had happened to Walter, and bikers from 3 states wanted to help. "This isn't just about getting revenge," Jake told the assembled group. "This is about protecting our communities from predators who target the most vulnerable people among us." A chapter president from 2 counties over stood up. "We've had similar reports in our area. Elderly folks getting harassed by people claiming to represent fake HOAs or property management companies. Maybe this is part of the same operation." Tommy had been analyzing the computer files all day. "It is," he confirmed. "These guys have a network that covers a huge area. They rotate between different regions so they don't attract too much attention in any one place." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What had started as a family matter was turning into something much larger. But he also felt the strength that came from having so many people willing to help. "Here's what we're going to do," Jake announced. "We're going to contact every victim we can find and encourage them to file police reports. We're going to provide the evidence we've gathered to law enforcement, and we're going to make sure Marcus Webb and his crew know that their days of hurting old people are over." One of the newer members raised his hand. "What if the police can't or won't do anything? What if these guys just move to another state and start over somewhere else?" Jake looked around the room at the faces of men who had sworn to protect their families and their communities. "Then we'll handle it ourselves. The Iron Wolves way." The room erupted in shouts of approval. Leather-clad bikers pumped their fists and pounded on tables. The sound was loud enough to shake the windows of the old warehouse. As the meeting broke up, Jake pulled his brothers aside one more time. "Are you two ready for what comes next? Because once we start this, there's no going back." Tommy closed his laptop and looked at his older brother. "They hurt Uncle Walt, that's all I need to know." Rick cracked his knuckles. "I've been ready since the day it happened. Those guys picked the wrong family to mess with," Jake nodded. The Iron Wolves had gathered their information, built their case, and assembled their forces. Now it was time to bring justice to the men who had broken an old man's arm and tried to steal his home. The storm was about to break, and Marcus Webb had no idea what was coming for him. The plan went into motion at dawn on Saturday morning. Jake had spent the entire week coordinating with Iron Wolves chapters from across 3 states. By Friday night, over 60 motorcycles were parked at various locations around the city, their riders staying in cheap motels and preparing for what Jake was calling Operation Uncle Walt. Tommy had used his computer skills to track down Marcus Webb's real headquarters. The fake storage unit was just a front. The actual operation was run from a run-down office building in the warehouse district. The building was supposed to be empty, but Tommy's surveillance had confirmed that Webb and his crew used the 2nd floor as their base of operations. At 6 in the morning, Jake stood in the parking lot of an abandoned gas station 3 blocks from Webb's building. Around him, leather-clad bikers were checking their phones and revving their engines. The sound of so many motorcycles was like thunder rolling across the empty streets. "Remember the rules," Jake called out over the noise. "We're not here to hurt anyone unless they try to hurt us first. We're here to shut down their operation and make sure they know that preying on old people has consequences." Bear adjusted his sunglasses and grinned. "What about their computers and files?" "Tommy will handle the technical stuff," Jake replied. "Everyone else focuses on making sure they understand that their scam days are over." Rick was practically vibrating with anticipation. He had been waiting 2 weeks for this moment, and Jake could tell his younger brother was ready to unleash all his anger at the men who had hurt Walter. "What if they try to run?" asked Diesel, one of the younger club members. Tommy looked up from his laptop. "They won't get far. I've been monitoring their communications and they don't even know we're coming. As far as they know, Uncle Walt was just a random victim who couldn't fight back." Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from Patch, who was positioned near the office building. "Target building secure. No police activity in the area. All clear for approach, that's it," Jake announced. Time to go. Stay together, stay cool, and remember, this is for Uncle Walt. The sound of 60 motorcycles starting at once was deafening. They pulled out of the gas station parking lot in formation, Jake leading the way with Tommy and Rick flanking him. Behind them came wave after wave of iron wolves, their chrome and leather gleaming in the early morning sun. People came out of their houses and apartments to watch the massive group of bikers roll through the streets. Some looked scared, others looked amazed, but everyone understood that something big was happening. When they reached the warehouse district, Jake led the convoy in a slow circle around Webb's building. The sound of their engines echoed off the concrete walls like a warning of what was to come. Then at Jake's signal, they all parked in perfect formation, surrounding the building completely. Marcus Webb was on the second floor reviewing files when he heard the sound of motorcycles outside. At first, he didn't think much of it. Bikers rode through the area regularly. But as the sound got louder and didn't fade away, he walked to the window to look down at the street. What he saw made his blood run cold. The entire building was surrounded by motorcycles and their leather-clad riders. These weren't just random bikers passing through. They were organized, disciplined, and clearly there for a reason. Brown. "Davis, get over here!" Webb shouted to his partners. "We've got a problem." Daniel Brown and Kevin Davis rushed to the windows and looked down at the sea of motorcycles below. Davis started to panic immediately. "Who are they? What do they want?" Davis asked, his voice shaking. Webb's mind raced through the possibilities. Had they crossed the wrong people? Had one of their victims turned out to be connected to organized crime? Then he remembered the old man with the broken arm in the yellow house. It's the old man, Webb realized. Jenkins. He must have family we didn't know about. Below in the street, Jake was coordinating the final phase of the operation. Half the bikers remained with their motorcycles, creating an impenetrable perimeter around the building. The other half followed Jake, Tommy, and Rick toward the building's entrance. The front door was locked, but Bear made short work of it with a pair of bolt cutters. The iron wolves poured into the building like a flood, their heavy boots echoing off the walls as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. Webb and his crew had barricaded themselves in their office. But the flimsy door wasn't going to keep out 30 angry bikers. Jake pounded on the door with his fist. "Marcus Webb, open this door right now, or we'll open it for you." "Who are you? What do you want?" Webb called back, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We're Walter Jenkins's family," Jake replied, "and we want to have a conversation about what you did to him." Inside the office, Webb realized he was trapped. There was no back exit, no fire escape, and no way to get past the army of bikers who had surrounded his building. His only choice was to face whatever was coming. All right, Webb called out. "I'm opening the door. But nobody gets hurt, okay?" Jake stepped back as Webb unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The fake HOA leader looked smaller and more pathetic than Jake had expected. In person, without his cheap suit and fake authority, Webb was just a middle-aged man with thinning hair and scared eyes. "You're Marcus Webb," Jake said. It wasn't a question. Webb nodded nervously. Behind him, Brown and Davis cowered near the back wall of the office. All three men looked terrified, which was exactly what Jake wanted. "2 weeks ago, you and your friends went to my great-uncle's house," Jake continued. "You threatened him, tried to intimidate him, and when he wouldn't cooperate with your fake HOA scam, you broke his arm and left him bleeding on his front steps." Webb tried to protest. "Look, that was an accident. The old man was being difficult and things got out of hand." Rick stepped forward, his fists clenched. "An accident? You broke a 78-year-old man's arm in 3 places. Jake held up a hand to stop his brother from getting physical. "We know all about your operation, Webb. The fake companies, the forged documents, the other elderly victims you've been terrorizing. We have copies of everything from your storage unit." Webb's face went white. "How did you—" Tommy held up a thumb drive. "We know about Summit Property Management, Willow Creek HOA Services, and Premier Neighborhood Management. We know about the 53 victims you've targeted. We even know about your plans for Phase 2 enforcement actions." The office fell silent except for the sound of motorcycles idling in the street below. Webb realized that these bikers knew everything about his operation, and there was no point in trying to lie or make excuses. "What do you want?" Webb asked quietly. Jake walked over to Webb's desk and picked up a stack of fake violation notices. "First, you're going to call every single person you've scammed and tell them that the HOA fees are canceled. You're going to return every penny you've stolen. That's impossible, Webb protested. We've already spent most of the money. Bear stepped forward, all 6 feet 4 inches and 250 pounds of him. Then you better figure out how to get it back, Jake continued. Second, you're going to turn yourselves in to the police and confess to everything. Elder abuse, fraud, assault, theft, all of it. Brown spoke up from the back of the room. And if we don't? Jake looked around at the 30 bikers who had followed him upstairs. Then you'll be dealing with us instead of the police. And trust me, we're a lot less forgiving than the legal system. Tommy had been working at Webb's computer during the conversation. I'm copying all their files and sending them to the FBI, the State Attorney General's office, and every local police department in the areas where they operated. Webb realized that his criminal empire was collapsing around him. The evidence would put him away for years, and the bikers surrounding him made it clear that running wasn't an option. You can't just take over our office and threaten us, Davis said, trying to sound braver than he obviously felt. Rick laughed coldly. Watch us. You guys spent months threatening old people in their own homes. Now it's your turn to see how it feels. Jake walked over to the window and looked down at the motorcycles surrounding the building. The sight filled him with pride and satisfaction. The Iron Wolves had come together to protect one of their own, and they had sent a message that would be heard throughout the criminal community. Here's what's going to happen, Jake announced. You have 24 hours to start returning the money you stole and making calls to your victims. You have 48 hours to turn yourselves in to the police. If you try to run, if you try to destroy evidence, if you try to hurt anyone else, we'll find you. Webb looked around the room at the faces of the bikers. These weren't just weekend motorcycle enthusiasts. These were serious men who had the resources and determination to follow through on their threats. And if we cooperate? Webb asked. Jake walked to the door and gestured for his crew to follow him. Then maybe you'll live long enough to serve your prison sentences. As the Iron Wolves filed out of the office, Jake turned back one more time. Oh, and Webb, when you're sitting in your cell, I want you to remember something. You didn't just attack a helpless old man. You attacked Walter Jenkins, and Walter Jenkins has a family that doesn't forget. The bikers thundered down the stairs and out of the building, leaving Webb and his crew alone with their fear and the wreckage of their. The effects of the Iron Wolves' visit to Marcus Webb's operation were immediate and devastating for the fake HOA scammers. Within 12 hours of Jake's ultimatum, Webb was on the phone with victims, stammering through apologies and promising to return their money. By the end of the first day, he had contacted more than half of the people his crew had targeted. Tommy monitored Webb's phone calls and financial transactions from the Iron Wolves clubhouse. He's actually doing it, Tommy reported to Jake and Rick. He's liquidating assets and transferring money back to the victims. I think we scared him more than he's ever been scared in his life. The police response was swift as well. When Tommy's evidence packages arrived at law enforcement agencies across 3 states, it triggered the largest elder abuse investigation the region had seen in years. FBI agents raided Webb's storage unit and office building, finding exactly what Tommy had promised they would find. On Monday morning, Walter was sitting on his front porch when Sarah arrived for her daily visit. His arm was still in a cast, but he was able to move around much better than he had been 2 weeks earlier. More importantly, he seemed less frightened and more like his old self. "How are you feeling today, Grandpa?" Sarah asked, giving him a careful hug. "Better," Walter replied. "Much better. Jake called me this morning and said I don't have to worry about those men coming back." Sarah sat down in the chair next to Walter's. She knew her cousins had been working on something, but Jake had asked her not to tell Walter the details until everything was finished. "What did Jake tell you?" she asked. Walter smiled for the first time since the attack. "He said the men who hurt me have been arrested. He said they won't be bothering me or anyone else ever again." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "That's wonderful news." "There's more," Walter continued. "Jake said they're going to pay for my medical bills and fix my front steps where I fell. Apparently they stole money from a lot of other people too, and they have to give it all back." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of motorcycles could be heard approaching from down the street. Walter looked worried for a moment, but Sarah squeezed his good hand. "It's okay, Grandpa. Those are the good guys." Jake, Tommy, and Rick pulled into Walter's driveway, followed by Bear and several other Iron Wolves members. They parked their bikes carefully on the grass so they wouldn't block the driveway, then walked up to the porch where Walter and Sarah were sitting. "Uncle Walt," Jake said with a big smile. You're looking better. Walter stood up slowly and shook Jake's hand with his good arm. Sarah tells me I have you boys to thank for catching those criminals. Just looking out for family, Jake replied. How's the arm healing? Walter moved his fingers carefully. Doctor says I'll get most of the movement back. It's going to take time, but I'm tougher than I look. Tommy pulled out his laptop and showed Walter a news article on the screen. You might want to read this. The headline read, Massive elder abuse ring broken up. FBI arrests 3 men in fake HOA scam. Walter read through the article slowly, his eyes getting wider as he learned the full scope of what Webb and his crew had been doing. They hurt a lot of other people, Walter said sadly. Old people like me who just wanted to be left alone in their own homes. Rick nodded. 53 victims across 5 counties. But it's over now. Webb and his partners are looking at federal charges for elder abuse, mail fraud, racketeering, and a dozen other crimes. They're going to prison for a long time. Bear held up a thick envelope. Speaking of which, this is for you from Marcus Webb. It's a cashier's check for your medical expenses, plus compensation for what he put you through. Walter took the envelope with surprise. I don't need their money. I just wanted them to leave me alone. Take it anyway, Jake advised. You earned it and they owe it to you. Besides, there are going to be a lot of legal expenses when this all goes to trial. Sarah looked at the amount on the check and gasped. It was enough to cover all of Walter's medical bills, repair his damaged front steps, and still leave him with a substantial sum for his retirement. There's something else, Tommy said. He pulled out a folder full of letters and cards. These are from some of the other victims. They wanted to thank you for standing up to those men. If you hadn't refused to cooperate, Webb's crew might have kept operating for years. Walter looked through the letters with tears in his eyes. They were from elderly people all across the region, thanking him for his courage and expressing their relief that the fake HOA scammers had been stopped. I didn't feel very courageous when they broke my arm, Walter said quietly. Jake put his hand on Walter's shoulder. Courage isn't about not being scared, Uncle Walt. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. You refused to let them intimidate you, and that made the difference for a lot of other people. Mrs. Rodriguez came over from next door to see what all the commotion was about. When she saw Walter surrounded by his family and the other bikers, she smiled broadly. Walter, are these the young men who helped you with those terrible people who hurt you? Walter nodded. Mrs. Rodriguez, these are my great-nephews Jake, Tommy, and Rick, and their friends from the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. Mrs. Rodriguez clasped Jake's hands in both of hers. Thank you for protecting our Walter. Those men scared all of us in the neighborhood. We didn't know what to do. That's exactly why predators like Webb target elderly people, Jake explained. They count on their victims feeling isolated and helpless. But nobody has to face that kind of threat alone. Bear pulled out a business card and handed it to Mrs. Rodriguez. If anyone in this neighborhood ever has trouble like this again, you call this number. The Iron Wolves look out for our communities. Over the next hour, more neighbors came by to meet Walter's family and thank them for dealing with the fake HOA threat. The Thompsons brought their children over to see the motorcycles. Even some neighbors who had never spoken to Walter before stopped by to express their relief and support. As the afternoon wore on, Jake realized that something important had happened beyond just catching the criminals who hurt Walter. The entire neighborhood had come together in a way that reminded Walter of the old days when people looked out for each other. You know what this means, Uncle Walt? Jake said as the gathering began to wind down. What's that? Walter asked. It means you don't have to worry about being alone anymore. You've got family watching out for you, and you've got neighbors who care about what happens to you. Walter looked around at all the people in his yard, his granddaughter, his great-nephews, their friends from the motorcycle club, and neighbors he had lived near for years. For the first time since Martha died, he didn't feel lonely. I'm proud of you boys, Walter said to Jake, Tommy, and Rick. Your parents would be proud too. You did the right thing, and you did it the right way. Jake hugged his great-uncle carefully, being mindful of the cast on his arm. We learned from the best, Uncle Walt. You taught us that family takes care of family, no matter what. 6 months later, Marcus Webb, Daniel Brown, and Kevin Davis were sentenced to federal prison terms ranging from 8 to 15 years. The judge called their crimes a particularly despicable form of predatory behavior, and noted that their willingness to use violence against elderly victims warranted the maximum sentences allowed under the law. Walter's arm healed completely, and he was back to working in his garden by spring. The Iron Wolves had kept their promise to watch over him, with club members stopping by regularly to check on him and help with any maintenance projects around the house. The Yellow House became something of a neighborhood landmark after the story spread through local news outlets. Reporters called it the house that brought down a crime ring, and Walter found himself being interviewed by television stations and newspapers from across the state. "I never thought of myself as a hero," Walter told one reporter. "I was just trying to protect my home." But to the other victims of the fake HOA scam, Walter was exactly that, a hero who had stood up to bullies when no one else could or would. The compensation fund that was established, with the recovered money from Webb's operation, helped dozens of elderly victims repair damage to their properties and recover from the financial harm they had suffered. Sarah continued her weekly visits, but now she often found her grandfather surrounded by neighbors and friends instead of sitting alone on his porch. The attack that had been meant to isolate and terrorize him had actually brought him closer to his community than ever before. The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club gained a reputation throughout the region as protectors of vulnerable people. Police departments began calling them when they encountered cases of elder abuse or scams targeting senior citizens. Jake established a formal program called Wolves Watch that provided security checks and support for elderly residents who felt threatened or unsafe. Tommy used his computer skills to create a database that tracked scams and fraud attempts across multiple states. His early warning system helped law enforcement agencies identify and stop several other fake HOA operations before they could hurt anyone. Rick channeled his anger about Walter's attack into productive action, becoming a volunteer advocate for elder abuse victims. He testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger penalties for crimes against elderly people,